The economy of America today is not a capitalist economy, and it's not a socialist economy either. Some people think that there is a spectrum from pure socialism to pure capitalism, and that the American economy is somewhere in between the two extremes of pure capitalism and pure socialism. That's the wrong way to look at it. The capitalism to socialism spectrum is not very useful for understanding the modern economy. Instead, the modern American economy is more like the economies of medieval Europe. There has been a gradual buildup of an enormous number of rules, and there's an entrenched bureaucracy which benefits from enforcing those rules. Politics is mostly about creating more rules in order to obtain sinecures for more bureaucrats. The key ideas to understand the modern economy are 1. The Cantillon effect, 2. Rule by committee, and 3. Bureaucratization. The key players in the modern economy are 1. The central bank, and 2. Organizations. By organizations, I mean nonprofits, corporations, professional organizations, or universities. The Cantillon effect. In every developed country, money is injected into the economy by the central bank. The Central Bank of America is called the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve creates new money out of nothing. It used to print paper money, and now it just changes the numbers in the official Federal Reserve spreadsheet. So there's a spreadsheet at the Federal Reserve which says how much money each of the major banks has, and when the Federal Reserve wants to create new money, they just go into that spreadsheet and change the numbers. I'm not making this up, this is actually how it works. After they've created new money, the Federal Reserve gives the money to the government and Wall Street. They've been doing this for the last 50 years, but it really went into overdrive in 2020. Next, the government and Wall Street give the money to their employees, their shareholders, and the government gives money to bureaucrats, welfare recipients, Social Security recipients, federal contractors, the military, universities, NGOs, etc. Then those organizations give the money to the people they work with. Universities give out more research grants. The military buys more stuff from arms contractors. NGOs hire more lobbyists, etc. As a result of this process, the economy has become a gigantic patronage network. The government gives the money to certain favored businesses and certain favored classes of people. Then those people patronize people under them. Those people patronize people under them, who patronize people under them, etc. Think of it as a set of concentric circles. The new money starts in the middle with the Federal Reserve, then the new money goes to the government and Wall Street, then people who have connections to the government and Wall Street get the money, then the people who have connections to the people who have connections to the government and Wall Street get the money, and so on. In the outer circle, there are the regular people who don't have connections, who are not part of any politically favored class. Another thing, while the new money is diffusing through the economy, prices go up, but not all prices go up at the same time. Since the government and Wall Street get the money first, they start buying stuff first, and so the things that they buy start rising in price first. For example, if the government buys construction projects, the price of construction will go up before the prices of other things go up. If Wall Street buys a lot of stocks, then stock prices will go up before consumer goods prices go up. After the government and Wall Street have spent or handed out the money is now in the hands of the next circle of people, and those people start spending the money on the things that they want. For example, universities have more money to spend, so the salaries of university researchers go up. The military has more money to spend, so the price of military equipment goes up. Health programs for retired people have more money to spend, so the price of healthcare goes up. Eventually, the money gets to the people on the outer ring, and the prices of the stuff that they buy go up, so the whole economy is now at a new, higher price level. In this kind of economic system, the main focus of economic activity becomes about serving people who are closer to the center of the patronage network. People on the outer circle figure out how they can serve people closer to the center. As you might have noticed, this system is a terrible deal for the people on the outer circle. By the time the people in the outer circle get the new money, lots of prices have already risen. When the people in the inner circle, the government contractors, the Wall Street bankers, when they got the new money, they could buy things at the old, lower level of prices. By the time the people in the outer circle get the money, all the prices have already risen. And the people in the outer circle have had to pay the higher prices the whole time, while the prices were rising. In this kind of economic system, the main focus of economic activity becomes about serving people who are closer to the center of the patronage network. People on the outer circle figure out how they can serve people closer to the center. So the people in the outer circle are made worse off by this process. They lose some of their purchasing power, that is, they lose some of their real savings while they are paying the higher prices. The Federal Reserve creates new money, the government and Wall Street get the money first, and they give the money to people in exchange for stuff. So the paper money goes outwards towards the outer rings of the network, and the real stuff goes inwards to the inner rings of the network. And of course, real wealth is stuff, not paper. So you can see why the government likes this system. And you can see why government-connected classes of people like this system as well. They can transfer the wealth of people in the outer circle to themselves. The transfer of wealth from outsiders to insiders is called the Cantillon effect. Here are some concrete examples. You've probably noticed that there's a lot of inflation, the prices of everything is going up. That's because in 2020, the Federal Reserve created a ton of new money. The new money is now diffusing through the economy, and since there's now more money and the same amount of stuff, prices are going up. Prices are going up to rebalance the amount of money with the amount of stuff. That's why we're seeing what the media is calling the Great Resignation. Since businesses are selling more products at higher prices, lots of businesses are looking to hire more workers. A lot of people are taking advantage of this opportunity to quit jobs they don't like and get a new job which they like better. Unfortunately, I think a lot of these people are making a mistake. I think they're underestimating how much prices are going to rise, and once the prices of everything get really high, businesses are going to find out that there's not as much demand for their products as they thought, and they're going to have to lay off a lot of the people who got new jobs last year. Another example. One of the effects of the patronage network is that outsiders have to serve the insiders, and one aspect of this is that young people serve older people. Older people already have careers and already have established a position for themselves in the corporate structure. This means that older people are more insidery and younger people are more outsidery. Therefore, when new money is created, it usually goes to the older people first. That's why so many jobs that younger people have these days are based on serving older people. Restaurant jobs, retirement homes, low-level jobs in a major corporation, etc. In a capitalist economy, young people could get jobs producing things rather than service sector jobs. Or as a last resort, young people could start new corporations to compete with the older, outdated corporations. But in the modern American economy, and this is not just America, this is every industrialized country, in the modern economy, regulation makes it de facto illegal to compete with the established corporations. And therefore, young people have no option to have a productive job producing stuff, and instead they have to take a service job where they serve older people. Or they could serve politically connected people, like academia. You can see this in the enormous rise of the healthcare industry over the past few decades. You could see it in the gigantic hospital buildings that have been built recently. I was talking to my uncle a while ago, and he said that in the rural area where he grew up, the healthcare industry is now the biggest industry in the region. That is not sustainable. You cannot have an economy which is just focused on caring for old people and doesn't actually produce anything. The reason why that has happened to many rural areas in America, that is, the reason why so many rural areas in America are now such that the healthcare industry is the largest industry in the region, is because of the Cantillon effect. Remember, old people are close to the center of the patronage network because they get Social Security and Medicare from the government. If you see a lot of young people working in healthcare or retirement homes, that's an example of young people, relative outsiders in the network, serving older people, relative insiders in the network. Another example of the patronage network is the wealth of the Washington, D.C. metro area. The counties in Virginia and Maryland around Washington, D.C. have become some of the richest counties in the country. That's because every year an enormous amount of money is taken into D.C. in taxes, and there are legions of political consultants, lobbyists, lawyers, lining up at the hog trough of federal spending, taking their cut. Those political people in the D.C. metro area are very close to the center of the patronage network, so they are enriched by the taxes that are paid by the commoners. Rule by committee. A good example of what I'm talking about here is what's sometimes called woke capitalism. In 2020, Bank of America gave $1 billion to charities for black people, training projects for racial minorities, some black-owned charities, special set-asides for loans to black families. From the standard economics perspective, that's very confusing, because obviously giving away $1 billion does not maximize Bank of America's profit. So what's going on here? The answer is that Bank of America, like all other major corporations today, is not controlled by a single individual. And so there's no actual person who's choosing to give away $1 billion of their own money. Instead, when a company is deciding to give away billions of dollars, that decision is not made by an individual. The decision is made by a committee. It might be a board of directors, but in this case, I suspect it's probably not even that. It's probably a corporate social responsibility board made up of some company employees with questionable liberal arts degrees who decide to give away a bunch of the company's money. They're not giving away their own money, they're giving away the company's money. And also, think about what an individual on that corporate social responsibility board is thinking when he votes on whether or not to give away the $1 billion. A guy on that board is probably thinking to himself, if he votes no, someone's going to call him a racist. He's certainly going to be asked to defend himself to explain why he voted no. And if he just votes yes, then he doesn't have to explain anything. The company gives away $1 billion, but that's not a problem for him personally because it's not his money. And the same is probably true all the way up the company hierarchy. When the CEO is asked to sign off on this, with the vice president for diversity right next to him, is he going to make an issue out of it? Is he going to say, no, that's too much, we should save that money for our employees or our shareholders? No. The CEO is just going to bite his tongue and sign off on giving away $1 billion to black charities because he's not the owner of the company. He's just the CEO. So the $1 billion isn't his money either. The same thing happens when a company decides to fire someone over a politically incorrect tweet that they put out years ago. From a business efficiency standpoint, it doesn't make any sense to kick out a valuable worker over some trivial incident. But think about it from the standpoint of a person on a committee who's voting on whether or not to fire the person. If one guy on the committee votes not to fire them, that guy is taking a risk that the mob will target him next. He's sticking his neck out by sticking up for the person who they're voting on whether or not to fire. And if they do fire the person, that hurts the business. That's a problem for the business as a whole, but it's not necessarily a problem for the individual guy who voted to fire the person. If we think of the company as the actor, then we see the company doing things that don't make any sense, like firing employees over trivial stuff or giving away $1 billion. But if we think about the actions of the individual people on the company's internal committees, then it makes a lot more sense. What they are doing is bad for the company, but it might be the safe option for them personally. It's a lot of corporate people taking the coward's way out. So if big corporations are doing things which are inefficient, why can't other people start up new businesses to compete with them? For example, I mentioned Bank of America giving away $1 billion. If someone ran a bank without giving away billions of dollars, that would surely be more efficient, and they could have higher profits and lower prices. Does that mean that someone could start a new bank and outcompete Bank of America? It does not. Because if you are an outsider to the banking industry, there is so much regulatory red tape that starting a new bank is effectively illegal. Here's an example. Caitlin Long is a banking industry insider who has been working to set up Avanti Bank, which will be a small bank in Wyoming which handles cryptocurrency. Caitlin Long said a couple years ago in an interview that her team spent more than 1,000 hours on the paperwork just to get their banking license. And that's not even a guarantee that they will get a banking license. That's the paperwork they have to do just to have a chance that they might get a banking license. And remember, Caitlin Long is already a banking industry insider. She worked on Wall Street for most of her career. Her team already knows which forms to use, and they know the jargon. If you or I put together a team and tried to start our own bank, it would take us much longer than 1,000 hours to get through that red tape. The effect of this huge quantity of regulation is that it is de facto illegal for an outsider to start a bank. New banks are sometimes started, of course, but new banks can only be started by people who are already insiders. I'm going to say a bit more about what I mean by insiders and outsiders. Here's an analogy. Imagine that there was a law that said that only people who had played football for at least 4 years were allowed to start music bands. Of course, anyone who wanted to start a band could join a football team and play for 4 years until they met the requirement. But most people who maybe would have wanted to start a band won't ever start their band because they don't like football, or they just don't have the time to play football for 4 years to meet the requirement. In that world, with that law, bands would tend to be started by guys who had already played football in high school and had already met the 4 years of football requirement. In that world, we would hear a lot of some kinds of music, country, rap, etc., and a lot less of other kinds of music, girl bands, goth, classical, etc., because most bands would be created by the same kind of person. That is, most bands would be created by the kind of person who likes football and plays football in high school. That's the reason why big corporations today all tend to act the same way. They are run by the same kind of people. The big banks and the big corporations are run by people who went to the same universities, think the same things, read the same books, watch the same Netflix shows, read the same newspapers, and have the same basic beliefs about how the world works. Of course, different kinds of people could start their own banks. That is technically legal, but in practice, the regulation is so abstruse, and the amount of paperwork is so enormous, that in order to start your own bank, you would first have to spend literally several years going to business school and then working a corporate job, and most people just aren't willing to do that. So we end up with a corporate system in which all the people at the top are the same kind of person. So there is no monopoly. It's not a system in which one person controls everything in an industry, but it is a system in which a single kind of person controls everything in an industry. It's an oligopoly. The people who end up in charge of the corporations are the kind of people who do like business school and do like the corporate PC culture. Those kind of people get to make all the big decisions in the business world, and everyone else has to obey them, because the enormous amount of regulation makes it impossible for us to start competing businesses of our own. That brings us to the third concept, bureaucratization. Once someone has already gone through business school, has learned the jargon, and has learned some of the regulatory rules, they have a vested interest in keeping those rules in place. They have become one of the few people who understands the rule, and so the businesses that are required to comply with that rule will want to hire that person. If the rules are repealed, then the people who are familiar with those rules lose their advantage, and companies no longer need to hire them. There are even some people who try to create new rules just so that they can be the only person who understands the new rule, so that then companies have to hire them. For example, Benjamin Lawsky was a regulator in the government of the state of New York, in my opinion. While he was working in the New York government, Benjamin Lawsky created a huge set of complicated regulations called the Bit License, which is now forced on all the companies in New York which deal with Bitcoin, in my opinion. Right after he created those regulations, Benjamin Lawsky left the government and started his own private consulting company, which helps companies navigate the regulations that he created, in my opinion. As you can see, the regulations that Ben Lawsky created work to enrich Ben Lawsky. And of course, he doesn't want those regulations to be repealed, because if the regulations were repealed, then nobody would want to hire his consulting company anymore. Similarly, when there is a group of people who have learned how to comply with the regulation, or have created a regulation specifically to enrich themselves, that group of people doesn't want it to be repealed, and so they lobby politically to keep it in place. They work as a class to lobby politicians to keep the regulation in place. The result is that regulations are created, but almost never repealed. So the amount of regulation gets bigger and bigger over time. Here is a graph showing the number of pages in the Federal Register. That's the book of all regulations from the federal government. This book is now more than 180,000 pages. Historically, this has often happened in societies that have not had violent upheaval in a long time. Parasitic interest groups create new rules which allow them to leech off the public. Over time, more and more of these rules build up, and economic activity becomes more about following all the rules and paying off all the interest groups rather than actually producing stuff. In the longest continuous empire ever, the Byzantine Empire, the mountain of complex laws and regulations became so enormous that the word Byzantine has come to mean extremely complicated or confusing. The process of accumulating little laws only ends when there is a violent upheaval, like a revolution or an invasion, that gets rid of all the laws, wipes the slate clean, and then the whole process starts over again. One consequence of bureaucratization is that it now takes much longer to get into the professions than it used to. 150 years ago, if you wanted to be a doctor, you could do an apprenticeship or go to medical school, and after just a couple of years, you could practice as a doctor. Today, you can't just become a doctor, you need to go through an elaborate credentialing process. You need a college degree, then you need to pass the MCAT. By the way, the MCAT was created by the American Association of Medical Colleges, and all the money that doctors have to pay to take the MCAT goes to the American Association of Medical Colleges. Then you need to spend 4 years in medical school, then you need to do a training and residency. These bureaucratic organizations, like the American Medical Association and the American Association of Medical Colleges, have gobbled up the medical profession to enrich themselves. They've crushed the medical profession under the weight of a bunch of little rules, and now the doctors and med students who actually want to help people are really unhappy with their jobs. What you can do to break out of the system. The current economic system is rigged against commoners. There are two things that you can do to break out of this system. 1. Boycott the US dollar. The US dollar is the thing that makes the Cantillon effect and the patronage system possible. Instead of putting your savings in dollar-denominated assets, you could put your savings in some non-dollar assets such as Bitcoin, gold, real estate, or emerging market stocks. The current economic system can only survive as long as commoners put their trust in the system by keeping their savings in dollar-denominated assets. If we, the commoners, withdraw our trust by taking our savings out of dollar-denominated assets, the system will collapse and we can build a better economic system in its place. Also, from the perspective of your own return on investment, I expect that non-dollar assets, especially Bitcoin and gold, will have a much higher return over the next 10 years than dollars. But that is my personal opinion, and I am legally required to say that you should do your own research, and this is not financial advice. Boycotting the US dollar is the best thing for the commoners, the best thing for the American people, and it's also patriotic. According to the US Constitution, Article 1, Sections 8 and 10, only gold and silver are supposed to be legal tender. The money that we have today, technically called Federal Reserve notes, were introduced through a gradual process of subverting the original intent of the Constitution. A mass movement out of dollars and into gold and Bitcoin would be a return to hard money. The other thing that you could do is civil disobedience against bureaucracy and credentialing requirements. For legal reasons, I can't go into a lot of detail about what that would look like. Bureaucrats always create a bunch of little rules which they demand that people follow. Since most people are cooperative and law-abiding, most people follow the rules. If we don't push back against the bureaucrats, they will keep doing it forever. Ordinary citizens need to start telling bureaucrats no. I get frustrated when I hear left versus right political debates about economics because the things that they talk about are just not relevant to what's actually going on. I hear people talk about whether it's fair to successful people to have a high progressive tax rate, or whether it's better to have lower taxes or more government services. And all of that might be an interesting philosophy topic, but that has nothing to do with the facts on the ground about how the economy actually works today. The economy of America today is not a capitalist economy, and it's not a socialist economy either. The American people are being robbed blind, and we're stuck having some kind of philosophy debate about the fairness of different tax rates. To recap, the modern American economy is mostly a patronage network centered on the government and Wall Street. The government and Wall Street get newly printed money from the Federal Reserve, Then some people serve the government and Wall Street in order to get that money. Then other people serve those people in order to get the money, etc. It doesn't have to be this way. America used to have a healthy, productive economy, but things have gone downhill over the last 100 years. Giant organizations like corporations, universities, and some nonprofits have become sprawling, unaccountable bureaucracies in which there is no room for individual initiative. In a healthy economy, bloated, old organizations would die off and be replaced by new organizations. But that can't happen in today's economy because there is so much regulatory red tape that it is de facto illegal to start a new megacorporation or a new university. Only revolutionary change can create an economy that will start working for commoners again.